Wow. Okay.
All right, excellent. So today we got 1 Kings 12, 13, 14, and 15. We're getting through the kingships of Rehoboam and Jeroboam and the split of the kingdoms. Um, the great technical innovation this week is that I realized that instead of putting four different screens up for each chapter, I could just put one screen up and then hit next.
Very
Uh,
good.
it only- and it only took me 4 weeks to come up with that great plan. Um, so that's great. It's
Yeah.
going to be huge, which means that it's only going to screw up the first time, not continually throughout. It being me. Um, all right. So with no ado necessary, the only kind of digression that I have planned in is a little talk about what Asherah poles might have been, because they probably weren't poles. Um, we'll get going here. Let's see here. If I hit screen share. Oh, you need to let me screen share. Not to you right now. That's off the thing.
What?
All right. Okay. Let's see here. All right. Cool. Thank you. All right. So that and that. That's the Zoom screen, and now this and the Zoom share. Oh, it's not sure that. Okay. See, I told you it only screwed the first time. Share. Okay, cool. First Kings 12. Is up, everybody? I'll take that as a yes. All right. Excellent. So Solomon's dead. He's been buried with his fathers, they say, and everything else that he did, the annals, his wars and whatnot, is it not written in the book of the Kings? It is. So, moving on. Rehoboam, that's his kid. By the way, Solomon must have done a pretty good job of organizing his line of succession, because there's no talk about like wars between his sons fighting for control. And considering how many sons he must have had, that that's actually a pretty good job. He must have done like administration there. I mean, officials keeping it all together. So, Rehoboam, um, the successor king, goes to Shechem, for all Israel had gone there to make him king. When Jeroboam, the guy, remember the prophet, I think is Ahijah, had told him he was going to be a king as well. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, parenthetically, he was still in Egypt, where he had gone from Solomon, fled from Solomon. Um, he returned from Egypt. So they sent for him, and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, "Your father, Solomon, put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you." That yoke probably was in the form of both taxation and forced labor. And Rehoboam answered, "Go away for 3 days and then come back to me." So the people went away. So he wants to get some advice. And Rehoboam, he's going to consult two groups here. First, he goes to the elders that had served his dad. And he says, "How would you advise me to answer these people?" And they say, "If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants." And so he scratches his head and scratches his chin and thinks about that. And then he consults the other group, the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him now, the administrators he had put in place when he took over. And he asks, "What is your advice? How should we answer these people?" In verse 10, the young men who had grown up with him reply, "These people have said to you, you know, you put a heavy yoke on us, make it lighter. Tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." So that's the advice he gets from the youngins. And so first of all, to say metaphorically, whatever my father did, I'm going to double down on that. All right. He used whips. I'm going to use scorpions, which is not the bug, but it was like a leather whip with a metal prod at the end, which would have hurt. Um, so which advice is he going to take? The wrong advice, because he's the king of Israel. So 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam, and the king said to them, as the king had said, come back in 3 days. The king answered the people harshly. Rejecting the advice given him by the elders, he followed the advice of the young men and said, my father made your yoke heavy, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions. So the king did not listen to the smart people, for this turn of events was from the Lord. Like God knows what's going to happen. And it's to fulfill the word the Lord had spoken to Jeroboam through Ahijah the Shilonite, that Jeroboam's going to get half the kingdom. Well, 10, 12, 7, whatever that is, 5, 6. when all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king in poetry. What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David. And so the Israelites went home to the north. And from then on, Israelites are up there, Israel. But as for the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them. So there were those who came down from the north and were living in Jerusalem, because that's the holy city. And so my supposition is that most of the Levites were probably hanging around Jerusalem, right? Especially because later we found out that Jeroboam, when he takes over the north, starts appointing anyone to be a priest. So my supposition is that the Levites were probably, in the south, or most of them were, or a lot of them were. So when King Rehoboam sent out Adoniram, who was in charge of forced labor, but when he sent them north, it didn't go well. All of Israel stoned him to death. Now, Adoniram, he had been in charge of forced labor for both David and Solomon as well, unless it was a generational thing and they were all named Adoniram. If not, he had been at this job for a while, and his bones were probably pretty easy to break at that point. So King Rehoboam managed to get into his chariot and escape to Jerusalem. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. This day being whenever the source material was written that the later prophet put together. All right. So now the kingdom split, just like that. Boom. Jeroboam's got the north, and Rehoboam's got the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, and really Simeon as well, down south. All right. And we're not talking about geographically a big split as far as the capitals are concerned, right? Because the northern kingdom is going to establish a temple, well, not temple, but a site of worship at Bethel. And of course, Jerusalem is the holy city and is still a part of the south. And as I understand it, the distance between Bethel and Jerusalem is like 16, 20 miles. Right? So it's a very tight border area there. So Rehoboam arrives in Jerusalem, and he mustered all Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, 180,000 able young men, give or take, to go to war against Israel and to regain the kingdom for Rehoboam, son of Solomon. But the word of God came to a prophet. The prophet's name is Shemaiah. He pops up again in 2 Chronicles with an oracle, and he's known to have written a history of Rehoboam's reign. Shemaiah, the man of God, says, "Say to Rehoboam, son of Solomon, king of Judah, and to all Judah and Benjamin, and to the rest of the people, this is what the Lord says. Do not go up to fight against your brothers, the Israelites. Go home, every one of you, for this is my doing." So they obeyed the word of the Lord and went home again, as the Lord had ordered. So there's not going to be a general all-out civil war, although skirmishes seem to be almost constant from here on. Right. Jeroboam. So he gets to be in charge. The Lord says, you get to be in charge of here. He's in charge for 30 seconds, and he's already screwing up. Although his thought here is probably not wrong-headed as far as a strategy goes. This is his thought. Jeroboam fortifies the city he's in, around the hill country Ephraim, and then he thinks to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David, so Rehoboam, if these people have to go up and offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. So if they got to go down to Jerusalem, they're going to give their allegiance to the Lord, to their Lord, small l, Rehoboam, the king of Judah. and they will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. So he wants his people to worship, but he wants to keep them away from Jerusalem. So, after seeking advice from who it doesn't say, the king made 2 golden calves. And as we all know, making golden calves always comes out well for the Israelites. He said to the people, "It is too much for you to go to Jerusalem. That's a hell of a trip. Here are your gods. Here they are. Here are your gods that brought you out of Egypt." And one he set up in Bethel, it's the south of the northern kingdom, and the other way up in Dan, it's the way up north. And this thing became a sin. The people came to worship the one at Bethel and went as far as Dan to worship the other one. I'm going to get back to the calves in a second here. First of all, in 31, Jeroboam built shrines on high places and appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites. He instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festival held in Judah. This would be the festival of tabernacles, I believe, and offered sacrifices on the altar. He did this in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves he had made. And at Bethel, he also installed priests at the high places he had made. On the 15th day of the 8th month, a month of his own choosing, he offered sacrifices on the altar he had built at Bethel. Now, the Feast of Tabernacles should be the 15th day of the 7th month, so it's not really an overlap there. So he instituted the festival for the Israelites and went up to the altar to make offerings himself. So a couple of things. The big sin is he's offering the sacrifices, not giving the animal to the priest to offer the sacrifices, because he's got illegitimate priests. So he's offering the sacrifices himself. He's taking on a priestly role. Now, when I first read this, actually, second or third time I read this, I was thinking, this idiot, he's making golden calves and he's calling them gods, right? It's a repeat of the desert experience. But it's not. When I read some more of the notes and some other material, he wasn't claiming that the calves themselves were representing God. The Canaanite deities were often represented in physical form as riding or standing on top of calves or bulls. And so what he was doing is he was putting the Lord, representing the Lord without a physical form, right, on top of these golden calves. So the golden calves themselves weren't supposed to be the Lord, right? But the Lord was supposed to be invisible on top of these calves. It would have been, I guess, understood to the people at the time. But he's offering sacrifices illegitimately. So before I move on here, please feel free to jump in with anything anyone wants to say or any questions or anything.
I think this passage is a little bit, I'm not sure the word ambiguous, perhaps even self-contradictory, because it's really kind of saying two things. One is that there was more than one legitimate place to worship Yahweh, and that's the setting up of the shrines in Bethel and Dan. The other is that there seems to be kind of a reversion to Canaanite religion here. You've talked about the different meanings that the golden calves have, but the golden calf was also a symbol of Baal, or sometimes even El, the father god, which is sometimes confused with Yahweh. So I think there's a kind of an ambiguity of what's going on here, whether this is a syncretic religion or whether it was simply a different variety of the Yahwistic faith. I think another interesting point about this passage is that what we may have here is a subtext of urban versus nomadic life, because the North seems to have been perhaps what kind of the Wild West, if you will. of this area. And so there may have been some nomadic culture still continuing in this area, whereas Jerusalem represented the urban model, even though it wasn't a huge city.
Which is like appropriate geographically too, because the north is more hill country and you're going to get more nomadic. You're going to get less urban development in the hill country.
So anyway, I think that, that's one of the subtexts here is that there's a kind of a cultural divide as well as between the two different kings.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And there was always that divide there, right? I mean, David had combined everything, the covenant relationship with the north that seemed to be having to be renewed with every new king. It didn't seem like it was that these two parts of Israel were they seem to be in the kind of relationship that the American states were in before the Civil War, right? Back when we said the United States are, instead of the United States is. And so moving on to chapter 13, chapter 13 is very strange, and it would be.
Kevin, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
I was wondering about the size of that army he was gathering. It said something like 180,000, I think you said?
Yeah.
That seems way too large.
It is. The text note that I have says that he must have been including everybody in that number, including servants and children or anything. But even at that, I still think it's too large.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, in the forum we've discussed this, that numbers are not numbers in the sense that we expect them to be an accurate count of human bodies. The average size of an army outside of the huge superpowers was probably less than 1,000. In many cases, only a couple hundred. And so the 180,000 is probably more the entire population of Judah and Benjamin.
Right. That's
so it's a symbolic number. Anybody who tries to read this as a literal number is sort of missing the point.
Yeah. And so many times throughout First Kings and actually throughout all the Jewish history books, the expression about sands, as numerous as the sand, is used again. I was rereading a passage from Judges earlier today. The one where Gideon attacks the Edomites with 300 people because the God says you have too many. Make these people go home. I just need 300. And before he attacks them, he says his enemies' camels were as numerous as the sand on the shore. That's a hell of a lot of camels. But yeah, that kind of figurative language is throughout. I agree with you. Even when they use specific numbers, it often seems to be used in figurative ways, just to compare, to set up the drama of how many, seemingly someone had.
Again, I think it's important to remember that these books were written probably sometime in the 7th, 6th, or 6th century. And at this time, at least the literate, cultured people of Israel had contact with these enormous armies of the superpowers. And so this was kind of a way of rewriting history in order to make them look almost as big as Assyria or Babylon or Egypt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Indeed. That's a great point. In 1 Kings 13, I think this is one of the strangest chapters this is the strangest chapter, in my opinion, in the book of First Kings. I think it's the second strangest part of Kings in general, after the part we're not going to be able to read in this group in 2 Kings, where Elisha gets a bear to kill some children. This has a couple of prophets in the middle of it, and I'm going to ask Monty some questions at the end about what the heck is going on here exactly. So, the man of God from Judah.
I doubt I will know, but
Now you have to come up with answers. The man of God of Judah, from Judah here in chapter 13, starts off. By the word of the Lord, a man of God came from Judah to Bethel. So he's coming from the south, the prophesies from the north. As Jeroboam was standing by the altar making an offering, which he's not supposed to do. By the word of the Lord, he cried out against the altar, altar, altar. This is what the Lord says. A son named Josiah will be born to the house of David. On you, he will sacrifice the priests of the high places who make offerings here, and human bones will be burned on you. That same day, the man of the Lord gave a sign. This is the sign the Lord has declared. The altar will be split apart, and the ashes will be poured out. Now, when King Jeroboam heard what the man of God cried out against the altar at Bethel, which he apparently would have heard in person because it was right there, he stretched out his hand from the altar and said, "Seize him." But the hand he stretched out toward the man shriveled up, so that he could not pull it back. Also, the altar was split apart and its ashes poured out according to the sign given by the man of God by the word of the Lord, which I think is awesome because he's giving a prophecy and then an immediate sign of his authority, right? Because the prophecy is not going to happen for what? 350 years, right? For Josiah. But the sign, snap your fingers. I am a good snapper. Snapping sign. The sign, boom, happens right then. Then the king said to the man of God, intercede with the Lord your God and pray for me that my hand may be restored. So the man of God interceded with the Lord, and the king's hand was restored and became as it was before. And the king said to the man of God, never gets named, come home with me for a meal, and I will give you a gift. But the man of God answered the king, even if you were to give me half your possessions, I would not go with you, nor would I eat bread or drink water here. For I was commanded by the word of the Lord, you must not eat bread or drink water or return by the way you came. So he took another road and did not return by the way he had come to Bethel. So far, so good. Now here it gets weird. Verse 11. Now there was a certain old prophet living in Bethel, whose sons came and told him all that the man of God had done there that day. They also told their father what he had said to the king. And their father asked him, which way did he go? Which I always hear in Elmer Fudd's voice in my head.
Yeah.
And his sons showed him which road the man of God from Judah had taken. So he said to the sons, saddle the donkey for me. So Pastor Monty can spend another couple minutes looking up the difference between donkeys and mules real quick. Saddle the donkey for me. And when they had saddled the donkey for him, he mounted it. And he rode after the man of God. And he found him sitting under an oak tree and asked, are you the man of God who came from Judah? I am, he replied. The man of God replied. So this old prophet said to him, come home and eat with me. Then the man of God said, I cannot turn back and go with you, nor can I eat bread or drink water with you in this place. I have been told by the word of the Lord, you must not do that. And the old prophet answered, I too am a prophet, as you are. And an angel said to me by the word of the Lord, bring him back with you to your house, so that he may eat bread and drink water. Parenthetically, he was lying to him. Verse 19, so the man of God returned with him and ate and drank in his house. I feel sorry for the man of God because it seems to me that, like, if an angel had told me something, and the other guy's like, I might believe an angel told him that too. Anyway, verse 20. While they were sitting at the table, the word of the Lord came to the old prophet who had brought him back. He cried out to the man of God who had come from Judah, this is what the Lord says. You have defied the word of the Lord and have not kept the command of the Lord your God gave you. You came back and ate bread and drank water in the place where he told you not to eat or drink. My house, basically. Therefore, your body will not be buried in the tomb of your ancestors. Okay. When the man of God had finished eating and drinking, the prophet who had brought him back saddled his donkey for him. As he went on his way, a lion met him on the road and killed him, and his body was left lying on the road with both the donkey and the lion standing beside it. Some people who passed by saw the body lying there, the lion standing beside the body, and they went and reported it to the city where the old prophet lived. When the old prophet who had brought him back from the journey heard of it, he said, this is the man of God who defied the word of the Lord. The Lord has given him over to the lion, which has mauled him and killed him, as the word of the Lord had warned him. Well, sort of warned him. Anyway, I don't remember the word of the Lord saying anything about the lion while he was eating and drinking. The prophet said to his sons, saddle the donkey for me. And the sons probably said, again? Anyway, they did it. And so he went out and found the body lying on the road with the donkey and the lion standing beside it. The lion had neither eaten the body nor mauled the donkey. And the donkey hadn't ran away. So the prophet picked up the body of the man of God, laid it on the donkey, and brought it back to his own city to mourn for him and bury him. And he laid the body in his own tomb, and they mourned over him and said, "Alas, my brother." And they did the big mourning thing they do. After burying him, he said to his sons, "When I die, bury me in the grave where the man of God is buried. Lay my bones beside his bones. For the message he declared by the word of the Lord against the altar in Bethel, against all the shrines on the high places in the towns of Samaria, will certainly come true." After this, Jeroboam did not change his evil ways, but once more appointed priests for the high places and all sorts of people. All sorts of people get to be priests. Anyone who wanted to become a priest, he consecrated for the high places. It's easy to get a job. It's like becoming a teacher. Just kidding. This was the sin of the house of Jeroboam that led to its downfall and to its destruction from the face of the earth. All right, let's spend a minute unpacking what the heck is going on here. Because there's things that I can reckon out, but there's one thing that I can't. So I'm going to talk first what I can reckon out here. Okay. The man of God from Judah, his prophecy seems pretty straightforward. Right? His command, the command the Lord had given him not to eat or drink, not to look this way or that, not to stay anywhere, that seems pretty straightforward. After he broke that command, even though he was tricked into it, the prophecy that was given to the old prophet to give to him at the table, I get it. I understand why the donkey didn't run away. I understand when the lion didn't maul him, because the Lord wanted everyone to see this wasn't an accident. This was the result of a prophecy that God's making this happen. If the lion just eats him, it looks like just a tragic accident. So I get that. I think I get that. What I don't get, and what I hope someone can explain to me, is what the old prophet's motivation is in lying in the first place. Anyone get that? Like, why did he lie?
I mean, it's doubly confounding because he tricks him, but then he also affirms him and wants to be buried with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem to be against him. It looks like it's set up like he's trying to help him, right? And
if he doesn't lie, it doesn't happen. I mean, think about it. If he doesn't lie, then the first prophet goes off, it goes away, and the Lord does not demonstrate anything.
Not only lies, but goes that agency of getting on his donkey and going after him and pursuing him and snaring him.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those stories where you got to wonder, what Yahweh is thinking here.
Or is it a story about how the two kingdoms are interlocked, or they share the same fate, or their fate they're intertwined in ways that are kind of mysterious but unbreakable. I have no idea whether that is what's going on.
I hope that it is a part of it. I feel sorry for the man of God from Judah, honestly, because it seems like he did his job, right? And I don't think it is true that he could have made that prophecy and that God needed some sign to the people that it was a true prophet, because according to the text, the altar split and ashes spilled out immediately. That would have been a sign to the people that this is truly a prophet. So I don't know why the man of God from Judah had to die. I accepted that there was a reason, but I can't reckon out that reason for myself.
Sorry. So this comes reference to Josiah. So somehow the audience here are not the contemporaries in the text, but those centuries later, during King Josiah's reign and the finding of the Book of Deuteronomy and all the reforms.
Mhm.
So what did this mean to them? I don't know, Richard. What were you going to say?
This is a supposition or a guess made on virtually no evidence at all. But my guess is what is going on here is that we had two old legends or short stories, if you will, that somehow got combined, and they don't quite all. It doesn't quite all hang together, and so again, the person who wrote First Kings. I think was using some ancient sources, and it sort of ended up being a confusing mess.
Purely by accident, then.
In the middle of the 13th chapter, I'm going to have to agree with you. I've just kind of given up on trying to find the deeper meaning of what happened.
Yeah, I don't think there is a deeper meaning to this story, other than again it points out the fact that the northern tribes are an apostate for one reason or another, either because they're adopting a syncretistic religion, or simply they're keeping the worship of Yahweh, but they're not doing it in the right place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Indeed. So,
evil and nefarious and entrapping. Yeah, the prophet, the man of God, too. Yeah.
Indeed. But there was a lot of prophets hanging around, though. There was old prophets and there's young prophets, and it was like the prophet business was active. 14. Ahijah. This is the guy who had told Jeroboam that he'd become Jeroboam. So Jeroboam wants to get not some advice. He wants to know what's going to happen. Okay, so at this time, Abijah, son of Jeroboam, became ill. And Jeroboam said to his wife, "Go, disguise yourself so you won't be recognized as my wife. Then go to Shiloh. Ahijah, the prophet, is there, the one who told me I would be king over this people. Take 10 loaves of bread with you, some cakes and a jar of honey, and go to him. He will tell you what will happen to the boy." I find it, he doesn't ask Ahijah to intercede with the Lord on the boy's behalf. He just wants to know what's going to happen. So Jeroboam's wife did what he said and went to Ahijah's house in Shiloh. Now Ahijah was blind, but the Lord had told him, "Jeroboam's wife is coming to ask you about her son, for he is ill, and you are to give her such and such an answer." This is apparently the translation, such and such an answer. "When she arrives, she will pretend to be someone else." So when Ahijah heard the sound of her footsteps at the door, he said, "Come in, wife of Jeroboam. Why this pretense? I have been sent to you with bad news. Go tell Jeroboam, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I raised you up from among the people and appointed you ruler over my people Israel. I tore the kingdom away from the house of David and gave it to you. But you have not been like my servant David, who kept my commands and followed me with all his heart, doing only what was right in my eyes, more or less. You have done more evil than all who lived before you. You have made for yourself other gods, idols made of metal. You have aroused my anger and turned your back on me. Because of this, I'm going to bring disaster in the house of Jeroboam. I will cut off from Jeroboam every last male in Israel, slave or free." And I love this part. "I will burn up the house of Jeroboam as one burns dung, until it is all gone. Dogs will eat those belonging to Jeroboam who die in the city, and birds will feed on those who die in the country. The Lord has spoken." And well, I'm sure the wife was like, "As for you, go back home. When you set foot in your city, the boy will die. All Israel will mourn for him and bury him. He is the only one belonging to Jeroboam who will be buried, because he's the only one in the house of Jeroboam in whom the Lord, the God of Israel, has found anything good." Poor kid. "The Lord will raise up for himself a king over Israel who will cut off the family of Jeroboam. Even now, this is beginning to happen. And the Lord will strike Israel so that it will be like a reed swaying in the water. And we'll see that there's going to be a series of rebellions and coups. So we're not going to have natural succession for a while. He will uproot Israel from this good land, and he gave their ancestors and scattered them beyond the Euphrates, because they aroused the Lord's anger by making Asherah poles. And he will give Israel up because of the sins Jeroboam has committed and has caused Israel to commit. Then Jeroboam's wife got up and left and went to Tirzah. As soon as she stepped over the threshold of the house, the boy died. They buried him, and all Israel mourned for him, as the Lord had said through his servant the prophet Ahijah. As for the other events of Jeroboam's reign, his wars and how he ruled, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? He reigned for 22 years and rested with his ancestors. So he had a nice long reign. And Nadab, his son, succeeded him as king. A word about Asherah poles in a second, but I want to get through the chapter first. Now, meanwhile, back down south, Rehoboam, son of Solomon, was king in Judah. He was 41 years old when he became king, a youngster, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city the Lord had chosen out from all the tribes of Israel in which to put his name, capital N. His mother's name was Naamah. She was an Ammonite. Judah did evil in the eyes of the Lord. By the sins they committed, they stirred up his jealous anger more than those who were before them had done, which is tough. They also set up for themselves high places, sacred stones, and Asherah poles again, on every high hill and under every spreading tree. There were even male shrine prostitutes in the land. Ew. The people engaged in all the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, who used to be a relief pitcher for the White Sox, king of Egypt, protector of Jerusalem. He carried off the treasures of the temple of the Lord and the treasures of the royal palace. He took everything, including all the gold shields Solomon had made. Rehoboam's not strong enough to do anything about that, so he made bronze shields to replace them and assigned these to the commanders of the guard on duty at the entrance of the royal palace. Whenever the king went to the Lord's temple, the guards bore the shields, and afterwards they put him back. As for the other events of Rehoboam's reign, all he did, are they not written about in the annals of the kings of Judah? There was continual warfare between Rehoboam and Jeroboam, but because it doesn't seem to have developed into a general warfare, it seems like that really means constant border skirmishing. Right? They take each other's near cities on either side of the border back and forth. And Rehoboam rested with his ancestors and was buried with them in the city of David. His mother's name was Naamah. She was an Ammonite, in case you forgot that from 15 verses before. And Abijah, his son, succeeded him as king. Now, when I went over First Kings with my middle schoolers, this is where I had to actually have a Zoom to straighten things out, because I had after I got them all quieted down, I said, no, it's not that difficult. There's 2 Abijahs, all right? Rehoboam has a son Abijah. Jeroboam has a son Abijah. And the first part of the chapter, Jeroboam's son Abijah dies. And the last part of the chapter, Rehoboam's son Abijah becomes king. 2 different Abijahs, you know. You're all like white kids from Northbrook. I'm sure you have several friends with the same name. I mean, it's not that. But still, they were like, blah, 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 blah. Took them a while to wrap their heads around it, but eventually they got it. I tried to look up a pictorial representation of an Asherah pole, only to fall down the rabbit hole of Asherah pole research to discover that no one knows. There's plenty of guesswork, but might not have been a pole at all. Right? Might have been a carved pole. Might have just been a tree naturally growing that spread out and was dedicated to Asherah. Asherah was a mother goddess, went over various names depending on the various regions of the Near East, and was, at least in a time before First Kings, way back, might or probably was associated as a consort of Baal or maybe Yahweh, and is mentioned as early as Deuteronomy. So Asherah, definitely a female goddess, and her shrines seemed to be fairly common. Perhaps early on there was Yahweh and Asherah combined shrines, but like she was part of the Canaanite pantheon there from the beginning, seemingly from as far back as you can go. So she's mentioned, if El and Yahweh and Baal and his various forms are the beginning before the beginning, she's there with them. Right? What I couldn't find, I found several different sources that all say that it really shouldn't be translated as poles, but I couldn't find anybody that would tell me what it should be translated as, or give a real explanation of pictorially, physically, what these things would have looked like. There's plenty of references to God commanding people to chop them down, so presumably they did have a physical form, But right here in this chapter, it talks about one underneath a spreading tree. So sometimes they were just the trees. Sometimes they must have been something other than trees made out of wood. I just wish that there was more about it, because I'm always interested in what these things look like physically. And there's plenty of references to Asherah poles. I just wish there was more information available. But unfortunately, the ancient Canaanites were unavailable to answer my questions.
Isn't there some sense that these sites were associated with fertility and fertility of the land and agricultural stuff? So, yeah.
Sorry, Pastor, I couldn't hear you.
That these Asherah worship sites were associated with fertility and the fertility of the land, the agricultural cycles.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I think all the different incarnations of Asherah, were related to the basic myths and concepts of fertility. But I'm with you, Kevin. I can't find very much about her either, other than that she probably has a dozen different names and is found in several different cultures throughout the Mideast. But no, I tried to find a picture of an Asherah pole, and I had no luck either.
Yeah, and although fertility is connected with her, there seems to be a vague, subtle, but nonetheless real difference between her and the fertility goddess that's mentioned in a chapter earlier that we talked about last week. It also begins with an A. And I'm not going to go number off the top of my head. I can't think of it now. But this other one was more associated directly with fertility, and Asherah seemed to be more like a mother figure. It's a subtle difference, and I can't wrap my head around it completely. All right, we'll do one more chapter today. Chapter 15.
One other comment, though, is I recall reading that after the exile, in the kind of Deuteronomistic history that gets written, that they blame their conquest by these foreign armies upon the fact that they were not properly faithful and they worshipped idols, and among them these like Ashura, but also Canaanite gods and such. That part of what is lost in the sort of rewriting and the repurifying of the scriptures after the exile are these references to kind of feminine images of God, the feminine energies. The exception to that are like Sophia and wisdom is kind of preserved as a kind of feminine aspect of the divine, but some of these other things might have been more prominent before the exile, and there's lost to time because there was this effort to excise those traditions from the Hebrew traditions.
Indeed, that's a great point. That's a great point. Let's get through one more chapter today, and I like it because it contains one of the very few kings that God likes and that serves the Lord correctly. Although Second Chronicles later fleshes him out some, he's not perfect, but he looks good here anyway. First of all, Abijah, the Abijah of the south. Abijah, in the 18th year of the reign of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, Abijah became king of Judah. And he reigned in Jerusalem 3 years. He was, his mother was Maacah. He committed all the sins his father had done before him. His heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his forefather had been. Nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem by raising up his son to succeed him and by making Jerusalem strong. For David had done, I love this part, for David had done what was right in the eyes of the Lord and had not failed to keep any of the Lord's commands all the days of his life, ... except in the case of Uriah the Hittite, which I'm glad that exception was finally mentioned in 1 Kings. There was war between Abijah and Jeroboam throughout Abijah's lifetime. That's it about him. All the other things he did, blah, blah, it's in the annals of Judah. And he dies. He doesn't reign very long. And his son Asa, his son succeeded him as king. So Asa, or Asa. Let's go with Asa. Sounds better to say that way. In the 20th year of Jeroboam, his final year, in the final year of Jeroboam, Asa becomes king of Judah. And he reigned in Jerusalem 41 years. His grandmother's name was Maacah. He doesn't mention his mother, so Maacah is important because Maacah is important. We hear her later. Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Yay! As his father David had done. He expelled the male shrine prostitutes from the land and got rid of all the idols his ancestors had made. Second Chronicles makes it clear that this was a slow process. He didn't do it on day one, but he did it. He even deposed his grandmother Maacah from her position as queen mother because she had made a repulsive image for the worship of Asherah. Asa cut it down and burned it in the Kidron Valley. Although he did not remove the high places, Asa's heart was fully committed to the Lord all his life. He brought into the temple of the Lord the silver and gold and the articles that he and his father had dedicated. We're not quite sure what that would have been, maybe plunder from elsewhere. There was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, throughout their reigns. Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and fortified Ramah to prevent anyone from leaving or entering the territory of Asa, king of Judah. Asa then took all the silver and gold that was left in the treasuries of the Lord's temple and of his own palace. He entrusted it to his officials and sent them to Ben-Hadad, son of this other guy, the king of Aram. So Damascus, basically. He was ruling Damascus. Let there be a treaty between me and you, he said, as there was between my father and your father. See, I am sending you a gift of silver and gold. Now break your treaty with Baasha, king of Israel, so he will withdraw from me. He's making a treaty with a common enemy against his wayward brothers. I don't know, that's so good, but as a matter of fact, it's not so good if in Second Chronicles there is a prophet who tells him, don't do that. I can't remember the prophet's name. You can look it up later. Ben-Hadad agreed with King Asa and sent the commanders of his forces against the towns of Israel. He conquered these towns, Dan, Bela, in addition to Naphtali. When Baasha heard this, he stopped rebuilding Ramah and withdrew to Tirzah. Then King Asa issued an order to all Judah. No one was exempt. And they carried away from Ramah the stones and timber Baasha had been using there. And with them, he built up his own towns in Benjamin. As for all his other reigns, all his achievements, all the cities he built, they're written in the annals of the kings of Judah. As this is an aside, in his old age, however, his feet became diseased. So all that couldn't keep him from gout. Then Asa rested with his ancestors and was buried with them in the city of his father David. And Jumpin' Jehoshaphat, his son, succeeded him as king. His name wasn't really Jumpin' Jehoshaphat, but that's the way I like to think of him.
It's slumping, Jehoshaphat.
He's more like me. He's like a hunchback Jehoshaphat. Meanwhile, Nadab son of Jeroboam became Israel the second year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned over Israel for 2 years. So Jeroboam was king up there for 20, and his son only gets a couple years, and he's evil, just like his dad. So Baasha, this king, he wasn't a son. He's from the tribe of Issachar. He plotted against the legitimate king, and he struck him down in a Philistine town while they were there besieging it. Parenthetically, the Philistines are on the march during this time. They're actually acquiring territory. Baasha killed Nadab in the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah, and succeeded him as king. As soon as he began to reign, he killed Jeroboam's whole family. All right, so that prophecy we heard about at the beginning of today, it comes true. I don't know if the people in the cities were eaten by dogs and the people in the country were eaten by birds. Let's assume they were. He did not leave Jeroboam anyone that breathed, but destroyed them all, according to the word of the Lord given through his servant Ahijah the Shilonite. This happened because of his sins he had committed and because he had made Israel commit. As for the other events of Nadab's reign, they're all written in the books of the Annals. All right, so, and that's the end. Then Baasha is king for a while, 24 years, pretty long reign. He's another evil one. So up north, they're falling apart. They got nothing but evil. The same sins Jeroboam had committed. So when we leave off here, see Baasha is king of the north, and Asa is king in the south. And that's where we are. First Kings is finally moved to the point where we got lots of kings. Kings back and forth.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone want to comment on today's fun? Be like Asa. Don't be like Baasha or Baasha. You're like Asa or Asa, not Baasha or Basa.
Tomato or tomato.
I don't know how to pronounce any of these people. I see a double A, I just give it the long A sound. That's the only pronunciation guide I've got going for me. And that's probably not even right.
Why do the British people have such a lot of words that have double A?
Mm-hmm.
Notice that.
It was AH, I give it the Ah. I give it the old Ah.
Or
Or IAH.
One feeling I have at reading First Kings and books like it, it's just how it kind of exhausting. One king after the other. Some are good, but most of all of them are bad. And just, what is God doing? Just turning over. Wringing his hands. How can God be so patient? I think is this takeaway feeling, that God's steadfast love is really unimaginably steadfast.
Indeed. Well, eventually they all got to go to Babylon and invent reggae music. So that's to look forward to as well. Well, next week we'll wrap it up. There's, I think, 6 more chapters, but I'll hit the highlights because it's basically a succession of kings through the rest of First Kings. I hope everyone has a fun, fantastic week. Stay cool. Keep that air conditioner flowing.
All right. And next week, which will be the last week, I think Marcia Smith, I think, will get us started.
Okay.
I'll be in Colorado, so I may be able to join you. It depends on what's happening.
Well, if you don't, that would be a bitter disappointment. So I'm sure.
I want to see just what happens. You know, how does the
Yeah.
book end?
How's it gonna come out? You know there's a second Kings, so you know
Yeah, yeah,
it's
so,
not to end on a cliffhanger.
yeah, I know. It's going to be on
It's got to be a cliffhanger. So
that'll wait for another season, I guess.
yeah.
You see, this is,
Pastor,
Yes. Richard.
when you get back from Colorado, I think maybe we should convene just about everybody that's here today plus a couple others, and sort of talk about where we're going with adult education in the fall.
Yeah.
Um, whether we're going to continue with just this Bible study, which I assume we are, but then also are we going to start an adult forum at a different time, or is it going to be combined? Or are we going to do it after Sunday worship? I mean, we've got a lot of possibilities there.
yeah, I agree. I fear that we're looking at the situation not going away. I don't think COVID-19 is going anyplace. So
Right.
I think we're going to be ending up being all on Zoom in the fall in terms of adult
So,
education. We have to think about what we want to do with respect to forum and the other adult education type things.
I'm going to stop the recording, but